as parents without working on it is that we tend to do to our children what our parents did to us in one way or another.
Whole industry of parental punishment and discipline that we call it is such a load of bullshit and so toxic.
All right, friends, I am sitting with Dr. Shefali, and I want to start, Dr. Shefali, by saying I'm just grateful to have this conversation with you. You are an authority. You're a big deal in the space of parenting. You've written multiple books, The Conscious Parent, The Awakened Family, if I'm not mistaken, A Radical Awakening, I think you wrote. And you're out with a new book. And that's why I get the privilege of speaking to you about parenting. And it comes at a special time for me because I've just had a child with my wife, and our daughter is 4 months old, and so I'm excited to talk with you and distill some of this wisdom and hear some of what you've shared in your book, The Parent Map. And so, thank you for being here. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, the book is called The Parenting Map, actually. But I like Parent Map too. So, the Parenting Map, and this is really a 20-step how to manual toward becoming the most conscious parent. Most of us parents dream of being conscious and imagine this conscious connection. And my other books talked about the vitality of that, the reason for that. But this book, I really broke it down very simply, logically, in a very linear way, how you can go from the precipice of relative chaos, disconnection, unconsciousness, and frustration to this beautiful place of deep bonding and clarity. Because
Mm.
many of us parents, we didn't have to go to school, we didn't have to get a license, and we are winging it. And we need to really not wing it anymore and take it seriously, because this is the most important work we'll ever do.
So, to draw some lines for people, I think it might be useful to talk about unconscious parenting versus conscious parenting, but also the listeners of my show are somewhat familiar with the idea of conscious relationship and this idea that we're attracted to people who are destined to bring up the things that we need to work on the most, our childhood wounds. It and it's a way of our mind creating an opportunity to resolve stuff that occurred in our childhood. And so when we embrace a romantic relationship, not as something where we need to give to get, and it's sort of this exchange of you give me this, I give you that, or where you're just trying to get something from your partner, but rather the relationship being a crucible for your personal growth and your spiritual evolution, let's say. Is that Does that analogy transfer over to parenting? Is that what you're referring to here with conscious parenting?
Yes, yes, absolutely. Whatever comes up was already there, to put it very simply. And we would like to blame the other for bringing it up in us.
Mm.
But the truth is, they would not be able to bring it up in us if it was not up in us, ready to come out in the first place. So, the intimate relationships, most of them, especially the parenting relationship, is like you said, that crucible for this exploration, because whatever's coming up was already there. Now, with our romantic partners, we can blame the mother in law, we can blame the parents. We're like, go back home, we can leave them. But here, when the parenting dynamic, it becomes even more poignant, pointed, clear that it's a lot, if not almost all of it, to do with us. Because we
Mhm.
were with this child, co creating their reality since almost day one. Yes. So, therefore, we have a heavy accountability here. Not that we created it, but we are co creating our experience of this child and our parenting process. The child is not creating this experience, we are creating our experience of it.
Uh, so yeah, this a high level of accountability is needed to be a conscious parent, and seeing that when you're triggered, it's not the child's fault, right? And in yeah,
I mean, even in how we'll describe the experience. Oh, it's so exhausting. Ah, that's you.
uh,
Even though it objectively is exhausting. Listen, let's talk about what it objectively is, okay? It is objectively literally one of the most difficult jobs in the world because you're given this lifelong responsibility, no return allowed, and this is it, right? They're here, they are who they are, and you're going to have to be with them for the rest of their lives in a very key role. So, objectively, it is challenging. It is financially, challenging as well, emotionally draining. Okay, so all that is objective across the board. Now, on top of that, we put a lot of our own issues with connection, our own issues with acceptance, our own isms. We put all of that onto this canvas called the parenting journey. And because they come from us to some degree, either biologically or adoptively, we believe that we have the unrestricted, unsupervised, and unmitigated right to project onto them whatever it is we want because, quote unquote, we own them, we possess them. And here's
mhm,
where things get really muddy in the parenting process because we truly believe they are ours. So, talk about the projection that gets unleashed without any question or accountability in this process. If we don't like them, we think we have a right to not like them. If we want to change who it is they are, we think we have a right to do so, all because we believe we own them. And
yeah.
that's where it gets really tricky, and the ego comes out even louder in this journey more than any other.
Yeah, I was just thinking about how people talk about their kids like, "This is my child," right? And if they're not mine, then whose are they? But what I hear you saying is they belong to themselves. They don't
Right?
belong to you.
They don't
Mhm,
belong to us, but that's so hard for us to fathom because the traditional parenting paradigm has so confirmed that we have ultimate authority, ultimate sanction. I mean, if you saw me at a park ill treating my child, you would be scared to come to, and you would call it an interference
right.
because we've been so trained that every parent knows best. That's not true. Parents don't know best because we are filled with our unconscious bias. We are filled with unhealed wounds. How can we know best? But parents are taught they know best. And this is what I'm talking about. We have been pumped up into such a place of arrogance and superiority that we literally don't even question ourselves. So, what I teach in conscious parenting and what I teach in this book, The Parenting Map, is you need to cultivate consciousness. You are not just a conscious parent because you deem it so. You have to cultivate it in yourself. And please don't
Mhm,
have the arrogance to believe that whatever it is you're thinking about your child is right. You have to really undo a lot of your past patterns to do this beautifully. So, your
mhm.
listeners listening, if they, and I know all of them are into self evolution and growth,
Yeah.
there is a beautiful place you can arrive at, but you have to cultivate it. You have to go through a journey. And that's why I laid out this book like a journey so that you can evolve into becoming the best parent you can be.
Mhm. Yeah, I think the starting point that we all start with is that, as parents, without working on it, is that we tend to do to our children what our parents did to us in one way or another. And we tend to project our own stuff onto our kids. So, uh, let's say, just speaking about a kid's emotions, anger, if you're not okay with your anger, if you're not in touch with your anger, if you don't know how to deal with your own anger, when your child gets angry, you deal with your child the same way you deal with yourself when you're angry. And that might mean suppression or rejection. right? And the same might go for sadness, and the same might go for joy. I know a lot of people who have been really kind of locked up in their ability to feel true joy, and that is they're triggered when they see a child feeling true joy. And you can imagine what a person then does to a child who's really feeling that in the moment and wants the parent to join them in that joy when they're not able, right? And when they're in a triggered state. So we all need to, like we all need to do our work to deal with our anger, to deal with our sadness, to learn how to really truly feel joy and to feel all of those things, so that we don't project onto our kids, and so that we do give them the full permission to feel what they need to feel.
And I love what you just said, but it's all tying down to our own self-awareness and
Mm,
self-acceptance. Most of us were denigrated as children and suppressed from our true selves. And so we're walking around really broken, really missing these vital pieces. And then when you see a child, and it's unequivocally the truth that children are just ready to receive the love and warmth from its caregivers. Children are ready to be in the present moment. They're ready to just accept, and they don't have judgment or conditions. But if we're cut off from all those parts within ourselves, we can even call a 6 month old a loser or an angry child or a broken child, because we're projecting our own stuff onto them, and we're unable to see them as these sovereign beings. And I see this a lot in fathers. They get impatient quickly, or they want the result quickly,
mm,
because so much pressure has been put on men to suppress their emotions and to produce and perform and be the ultimate providers. So fathers have a hard time with children, because children are quote unquote non-productive, right? They're just being. And that's why many times fathers will want their kids to be in athletics or great performers, because that's what was put on them.
mm,
But I have to teach fathers, especially, to enter the present moment and to just be and to allow. And in terms of the typical female, many mothers have a hard time, with their voice or their anger. So, they're good girls typically. They've been raised to be perfectionists. So when their kid is just having messy feelings, a lot of our mothers feel helpless, like, oh my God, my kid is a reflection of me, and they're not being perfect, or they're being so loud and noisy, that goes against what they were allowed to do. So then they don't allow it in their children. So in these very profound ways, we don't see the wholeness in our children, and we don't
mm.
allow for them to be in their own point of autonomy.
Okay, let's get into the weeds a little bit, because there's so much in your book. There's so many chapters that I wish I could just, you know, have you on for 24 hours and just dig into each one with you. But if I could hone in on a few subjects, the first one that I'd like to touch on is punishment. Uh, and the title of your chapter is "Instead of Punishment, Do This." And I think this is an important subject for men, particularly. One of the things that I know and notice is that men communicate via challenge. We actually really like to challenge the world and challenge each other and challenge ourselves. And I know so many people who received that energy from a father in a way that was wounding and abusive at times, and that was never forgotten, traumatizing. This sort of like, you need to do better always. This isn't good enough. And just, yeah, always just bringing this sort of challenging energy that, you know, in many ways is indistinguishable from aggression at times. And, to go down another thread here, I was spanked when I was a kid, and I had my mouth washed out with soap when I said a bad word, or when I made my parents angry by saying something. Um, and I didn't regard my parents as abusive, and my parents overall, I think, did a great job. But with that stuff, I think they were doing what everyone else was doing at the time, and in many ways, what their parents did to them. Um, and now looking back, I realize, even though at the time it was normal for me to get spanked and to have those kinds of threats coming at me, uh, now I'm like, oh, my parents were hitting me while telling me not to hit other people, and that hitting wasn't good. So I want to dig into this topic of punishment, and what's wrong with that style of punishment, and how do you keep the wheels on the bus without using punishment to correct behavior?
Wow, yeah. Boy, that whole industry of parental punishment and discipline that we call it is such a load of bullshit and so toxic. It comes from parental ignorance and arrogance. It comes
Mm,
from a delusion of superiority and narcissism. It's actually lazy and very unevolved and primitive. It's basically the parent not liking something, arbitrarily deciding that they don't like it, and then just unleashing rage on the child,
right,
but
right,
calling it, ennobling it as if it's a noble thing in the service of the child's interest, not realizing
right.
that that sort of ridicule, shaming, real denigration is just absolutely toxic. And it has nothing to do with the child, it has all to do with the parent's ignorance. And it is so primitive and so treacherous that it has raised generations of masculine anger. And that's why we call it toxic masculinity. Not that every male is toxic and not that masculinity inherently is toxic, but
Mm,
this is that toxic part of it. This unleashed, unmitigated aggression, dominance, which creates suppression and separation.
mhm,
And really, I feel so bad for children who've been raised like that. I was not raised like that. I didn't raise my child like that, and you will not, but you're a pattern disruptor. But so many of my contemporaries were raised like that because parents thought that was the way to do it. And what it does to a child is it creates this sense that they are very wrong, that their being is wrong. That's what shame is, that their being is wrong, not what they did is wrong, but what their being is wrong. I mean, just now before your podcast, my daughter called me. She's 20 years old, and she said, Mom, I fucked up. And she got to the airport late. Her friend got there late. Now they can't get on the flight. So um, but
mm,
when I hear those words, if I was doing it the traditional way, I would say, how could you? What's wrong with you? What the hell? You need to pay, you need to suffer, you need to be admonished, you need to really be in check. And it comes from a suffering model, it comes from a lack based model, it's religiously kind of intoned. Life is
mm,
suffering, we have to suffer. We are sinners. It comes from that model, right? Spare a child, spoil a child, spare the rod, right? All that mentality is old fashioned. But instead, when she called and she said, I fucked up, I immediately felt compassion, right? Because she's only 20. Yes, but she's already admitted it. The thing is that children know when they mess up, but they
mm,
want to have somebody understand them and correct them gently, not actually make them feel like their essence is wrong. So, public or private shaming, spanking, slapping, and beating, screaming at them, grounding them, locking them up, throwing things at them, withdrawing love, neglecting them, taking away possessions, all these are antiquated, archaic, toxic ways of raising a child and correcting behavior. Um, and it creates separation. It tells the child that their essence is wrong, and then it shuts down connection. And it
mm,
will momentarily bring about what you want, but it's never sustainable.
mhm. Yeah, that list that you just rattled off, I think I had every single one of those things done to me except throwing. I don't think my parents ever threw anything at me, but uh,
But they threw verbal abuse, right?
yeah, yeah, and I hear what you're saying. It's like a child when they've messed up in some way, they need a safe space to go and debrief that and find out what happened and how they can do better and how do we clean this up. Like literally sometimes it's like I knocked over the vase and smashed the glass on the dining room table. They need a safe space to go and sort of figure out how to solve that problem and not spin into a shame spiral. And in hindsight, what I was getting actually was this like unsafe space. And so without my parents to sort of support me in those moments, uh, I did withdraw and hide from them, and I did learn that I couldn't trust them. And by the time I was a teenager, I just wanted nothing to do with it. Like an early teenager, I wanted nothing to do with them because I felt like I couldn't trust them. So, and I think that story is very common in my generation for sure. It was like this, like our parents didn't get us. I talked to a lot of men, and we debrief our childhoods a lot. And there's 99% of the time, there's this sense that like my parents didn't get me and really like support who I truly was. They provided for me in a big way. Like our generation, my parents' generation did really good at providing for their kids, for sure, in a physical way. But in an emotional way, they didn't have that vocabulary yet because their parents were traumatized war generation. So yeah, I hear what you're saying is like you need a safe space to be and to be imperfect and to mess up. And your parents are that first safe space. And so if your parents are punishing you all the time and withdrawing love, shunning you, shaming you, locking you up in your bedroom, turning your room into a prison cell, uh, it does the opposite of creating a safe space.
Absolutely. You see, in my book, The Parenting Map, I teach parents that there are three reasons why kids misbehave. The three reasons why kids misbehave are lack of skill, which means that literally their brains have not yet developed and they will not develop till they're 28 ish.
Mm,
So
mhm,
we're talking the long arc here. So, how can you have children and then blame them for being children, which means that their cerebral cortex is going to be fundamentally compromised? And the second reason is lack of experience. They haven't lived long enough to have that experience. So, how can you have children but then expect them to have the experience of an adult? And
mhm,
the third reason is lack of worth. They're feeling shy to fail, they're feeling scared to fail, or they're feeling scared to ask, or in some reason, they're feeling compromised emotionally. So, lack of skill, lack of experience, and lack of worth. If we
mhm,
understand this, then we will not treat them with ridicule and disparage. We will honor that this is exactly who they are. their
mhm,
their functioning hasn't yet developed, and I cannot teach them through domination. I cannot teach them through submission. That is just control. That is not education. So we've got it so messed up, and we need to forgive our parents for the way they raised us, but we need
mhm.
to, like you are, be the pattern disruptors.
Great. So now that we know what the problem is, or one of the problems, how do you parent without punishment? How do you, in a more, maybe a more intelligent way of asking this question would be, how do you avoid being a tyrant, right? Avoid being abusive to your child, while not being a helicopter parent, while not allowing your kids to be in charge in the household.
Yeah, see, first we need to understand that we need to come from an empowered, joyful, abundant
Mm,
mentality. We cannot come from this fear control mentality.
right.
The traditional parenting paradigm is always operating out of fear. And when you
Mm,
have fear, you will control. When you have fear, you will withdraw. When you have fear, you will dominate. It's all based on separation and fear. So we need to first step out of that mentality and begin to embody a different mentality. And it is a mentality of connection before correction. It is a mentality of connection before control. It is a mentality of deep understanding of our children and who children are in their essence, and how we can project our insecurities onto them. We have to understand. That's why in this book, The Parenting Map, which we're talking about now, I have three stages. And the first whole stage is about changing mindset. So we have to read that. Then stage two is all about disrupting patterns, like we've been talking. And stage three is about different things we can do to connect. So in stage three, I talk about what you can do instead of punishment. And I use the acronym NBC, just to be silly. And N is negotiation. You have to come up with all these acronyms so people remember.
Yeah.
So N stands for negotiation, which means that both you and your child need to win. It is not a parent win and a child fail. That's not a win then. That's a
Mhm.
both losing situation. So negotiation engenders in the parent this attitude of partnership, of allyship, where you truly attune to your child and compromise. So during my child's teenage years, she would come to me like this: okay, mom, I have a proposal. Right? She already knew we have to negotiate, right? So she would want 30 people over and she would want alcohol and a wild party, and I want zero. So now we are at two ends of the spectrum. And I want a peaceful night. I don't want anyone messing up my house. But hello, I live with a teenager, so
Yeah.
I need to understand her. And she lives with, hello, an older woman, like she calls me. So she needs to understand. So we both would negotiate, right? Of course, she would always try to win, but she also honored me. And I had strict rules about, if the music goes above this, and if the people go above this, and if I see this, and then I'm coming out and I'm stopping the party, okay? And she'd be like, okay, 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 but can I please do all this stuff? And we used to negotiate, and it actually, I would not even have to step out of my room. She would handle everything, right?
Mm.
But she would approach it like a business deal, right? Not as a minion or my subordinate coming to the boss. No, she was like, I'm an equal player. I know what I need to do, but I have this person who's also an equal player. Oh man, I have to convince her. So I taught her from a young age to negotiate, and it's an attitude, and it creates the stage for the next level, which is B and BC. B is where the real hardcore work happens, and that's boundaries. And
Mm.
boundaries have to constantly be instituted. It's not a one and done thing. If you are on a health, fitness, diet mentality, you know that you're always breaking the rules, right? So it's not about one and done, and then the child needs to get whipped and locked in the dungeon. No, it's constantly creating that muscle of the boundary. So, but we have to remember, boundaries are not walls.
Mhm.
Boundaries are safe spaces within which all parties can exist. And it is not born out of reactivity, but born out of true honoring of worth and each one's sovereignty. And boundaries are not created in the moment of the fight or the argument. Boundaries are created over the long arc of the relationship over time, and they really speak to the conditions, not the actual rules. So, for example, instead of telling your kid, don't eat cookies, right? That's like constant rule breaking opportunities, like don't eat this, don't do that, don't do this. Instead of that, create the conditions. Don't have cookies in the house, right? Instead of saying, don't be on your phone after 10 o'clock. No, instead of that, create a long-term family policy where everybody puts their phone out on the parking dock, on the loading, whatever it's called, the what's it called,
Mhm.
charging dock, right?
Mhm.
So create conditions which speak to atmosphere rather than rules which speak to control, right? Don't go
Mhm.
for control, go for conditions upon which all can thrive. I often tell parents of young children, I'm sorry, if you're out there watching a video game or playing a video game or talking loudly or, not going to bed as a lifestyle, it's going to be very hard for your 7-year old to feel like they can go into sleep if there's loud noise next door. All of you have to create that condition of kind of turning the lights down, and now it's nighttime, and creating that ritual. And then once they sleep, you can get up again. But it's very hard to ask children to go away from all the fun and there's big loud noise next door, right? So you create the conditions. You create the conditions for it to happen.
Yes. I remember that as a kid. It was very I had older brothers, and there was not this sort of like, hey, we're all in this together kind of vibe in the house. There was almost always some noise downstairs. Somebody was watching a movie or playing some music or having people over, and I was expected to like be upstairs in the bedroom trying to fall asleep.
I mean, it's like, what are we asking from these? These are human beings who have normal, natural tendencies, and we expect so much from our children. We're
Mm,
really toxic and abusive many times. So,
mm,
in the boundary section of this book, I talk about parents needing to examine who is this boundary for? The who, why, what, and how. Who is this boundary for? Is it for my ego or is it for
mm,
my child? For example, if the kid ate three-fourths on the plate but didn't eat one-fourth because they had a boundary and they were like, I'm done. Do we then force them to eat the rest of it? Because in our mentality, it's like, you don't waste and you eat my food. And or is it really honoring the child's digestive system and honoring their palate, right? Instead of forcing them out of some absurd idea, do we honor them or do we project our own vision onto them, right? Then the next question is, why does this boundary exist, right? Why have I even created this boundary? Is it for them or is it for an idea of them? Meaning, if
mm,
we tell them, you have to uh, run 3 miles every day, is it truly something that they need in that moment, or is it something that you think they need, right? So examining, or go practice the piano for 40 minutes a day, is it truly life enhancing, or is it something that you think will make them a great piano player, which is more ego enhancing, right? So ask,
mm,
really examine what rules you create, and then what is this boundary made of? Is it negotiable or is it in stone? I call them sand boundaries or stone boundaries.
mm,
So many times parents will say, no, dinner is at 7:15. And then when I ask the parent, really, like it cannot be at 7:30, they go, maybe it can. So I go, then why do you create stone boundaries over things that need to be fluid? Right? And then they'll be like, no, everyone needs to sit at the table. And I go, okay, that's a great idea and it's a fabulous vision. But if your kid sits down on the floor, is that such a bad thing? Like, are they like violating some sacred holy grail? It's okay. Maybe they want to sit on the floor. All of you can sit on the floor. Don't focus so much on the content. Focus on the process. Are you connecting?
mm,
Are you laughing? Is it safe? Is it
mm,
relaxed? Is the atmosphere anxiety free? That's what we need to
mm,
focus on.
mm,
And then how will I communicate my boundaries? Will I communicate it through commands and yelling and dictates and rules? Or will I do it through connection? Is my home a safe space for my child where my child feels they have the permission to thrive and be playful and make mistakes? Isn't that what a home is? Right? Versus a house of rules, which will be a house of cards that fall down. And then
yeah.
the third part of that is C, consequences, where I always say, let life teach the child, right? Like, so my child just called up, she messed up. Now she's all in stress. Now, do I need to tell my child, oh, you should be on time at the airport? I told her 1,000 times. It didn't work. But I'm so happy she's late because maybe that'll work. So
Mm,
life is our children's best teacher. Instead of us having to shame them and make them feel so ridiculed, let life teach, right? So if they keep getting up late, let them go to school late and let them handle the teacher and tell the teacher, go ahead, give them a consequence. So we try to allow natural consequences as much as possible.
this is so good. Yeah. So negotiation, boundaries, consequences. And I love this piece around negotiation and creating a win-win with the child. I used to do equine therapy at a treatment center that I worked at, and one of the teachings that they would do is they would bring a person into the pen with a horse, and they would introduce this concept of like two yeses, and we all remember, most of us remember a time or many times when we were kids where we were force fed something.
Mm,
Force fed. I think I was like force fed wild rice. I was force fed blueberries. I
mm,
hated both of them. I love them now. I've figured that out. But it you never forget something that you're force fed, even if it's a strawberry or something that tastes great, because it leaves this bitter taste in your psyche that you weren't choosing. And it's a yes on top of a no. And so this idea of trying to get two yeses has been really useful in my relationship, in my marriage with my wife. Whenever we're talking about something, we really try to get to two yeses all the time, because anytime there's a yes and a no and it gets forced through, it doesn't end well and the memory doesn't go away quickly, right? Um,
That. I love that.
yeah.
And there's so much value in that that is sustainable generationally. And the no upon the yes can work because one is in power. That's all. But the one who's not in power will eventually resent that. And that's that bitter taste that stays there. And
Mm-hmm.
we talk about children honoring their bodies and their boundaries, right? We want to raise daughters and sons who honor each other's boundaries when they are in relationships. But look how we just run roughshod over our children's boundaries. You know, my daughter almost always kept the last two bites of the plate left uneaten. And in my head, I was like, damn it, just eat the last two bites. But you know what was more important to me? Not that she ate the last two bites, that she knew her body so well that she had enough. And I
Right.
wanted her to honor the enoughness of her own boundary so that when she grew up and she said enough, she meant it and she would want it to be followed, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when she told a man or if she was in a relationship with whoever, she was able to say, no,
Yes.
not right now,
Yes.
honor me. Or if she said, I don't want to kiss that person, that relative, I would be okay. But I fell into the same traps early on before I became fully conscious. I used to force her to go say hello to people and and kiss people, and then she really revolted and bolted, and then I backed off. I was like, why am I doing this? And mostly it was because I wanted to look like the good one. I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to be socially accepted. And then I just said, F it. What's more important to me is my daughter know herself and her boundaries and her opinions. As long as she's not being offensive to anyone else, as long as she's not being harmful, that is more an important lesson to learn.
Yeah, that's really hitting so hard for me right now, because as a coach and a counselor, I work with a lot of people who don't know how to say no when they need to say no, and they don't know when they need to say no. It's very confusing.
Yes,
They don't know when to say yes or when to say no.
yes.
And it's when you talk to them about their childhood, it's clear that their no was suppressed and forced, and that they were acting and behaving the way that they were told to act and behave, rather than what they truly wanted to do in the moment. In all of these little moments at the kitchen table, or when you're going to visit the family, and having to sort of force feed yourself what someone else is saying you should do or be every day of your life, slowly erodes your own sense of what you want, and prevents you from learning that in each moment. So it makes sense that we end up with a bunch of adults who are running around trying to please the power structures of the world or please each other, and not really actually knowing what we want. And yeah, I mean, if you want to talk about empowering women particularly, we need women who know how to say no to anything, not just in relationship to a potential romantic partner or sexual partner, but in the working world, whether they want maternity leave or not, whether they want to have children or not, and like really know what they want. And
100%. And
that's how we build it.
people think that this should be suddenly magically developed in adulthood in the moment, and
Mm,
it is so developed moment by moment between parent and child. So if you're
mm,
a parent who wants to raise empowered boys and girls and adults in the world, please read my book. It's called The Parenting Map. I literally teach you how to do it step by step, 20 steps, and every moment that you do that, it builds on the next one, and then it
mm,
builds on the next one, and that's how you get an empowered adult. My daughter's 20 now, and I have to say she's very empowered. But she also takes no prisoners. She doesn't care to please anybody, but of course is always respectful and kind. But she's not a slave of other people, and I was a slave, and that's why I did this work, because I didn't want to raise another generation of submissive spirits. I wanted to
mm,
raise an empowered being who was going to because she was empowered, she wouldn't do violence against herself or others. I didn't do violence against others, but I did violence against myself. And that's the problem. We're either warring against ourselves or against others, and we need to stop. But it starts in the very early years of parenthood, where the parent
Mhm.
honors the mighty voice of this little person and makes them feel empowered that they will be heard. and
Mhm.
and and of course the parent does a win-win. If the kid says, I want jeweled shoes, you're not going to go buy jeweled shoes, but you will ask them if they want yellow socks or pink socks. That's okay to ask, but wherever you can engender that inner knowing, you're going to try to engender that.
Mhm. Uh, yes. So, we've touched on negotiation, boundaries. I just want to keep reviewing this, NBC. Um, Boundaries are consciously created, they're co-created. They're not just a bunch of walls that you put your child inside of and stay super rigid on. There's some that are, there's hard lines, of course, for every parent, but this idea of having porous boundaries when needed, but really speaking to the conditions, not the rules, and understanding your who, why, what, and how. When you were describing boundaries, something came up for me because I I got a sneak peek at your book. Your book's not out, but you sent a sneak peek, and one of the things that you share in the book is that many parents, the way that they talk to their children, if they talked to an adult that way, the adult would either end the relationship, fight back, or call the authorities and report abuse, right? And that really kind of hit home for me, is like speaking to children as though they're going to be adults one day and remember what you're saying to them, and sort of respecting their sovereignty and autonomy where they're at in their growth process, right? Like, we always have to take care of their safety, but uh how you started this show, just talking about how we tend to like dominate and rule over children because we see them as possessions, but um, if we can regard them as sovereign beings from the beginning, then we can do this co-creation and we can respect their space from the beginning. And then it's not even an option to think about punishing or hitting your child, because you wouldn't do that to your neighbor, or an adult friend. And it's sort of what you're doing here is trying to get us to rise up and use a higher consciousness way of relating to children, and it makes so much sense to me.
And if you do mess up, said very gently, and you do rage. I was unconscious. No one taught me this. I had to write it out to learn this myself. So when I was unconscious, I used those moments to really do deep work. I did lose my shit many times, and you will, as a parent, lose your shit. It's okay. You're young. You're a young parent, but don't be so appalled when you see some unconscious rage come out of you. Have compassion for what's coming out of you, and there's a reason that this pattern has been set up. And in stage 2 of this book, I talk about the 5 kinds of parents you can become. You can become a fighter parent, a fixer parent, a feigner parent, a fleer parent, and a freezer parent. It's
Mhm,
okay. You are going to come out in wild, reactive, unconditioned, conditioned ways, in
mhm,
unmitigated ways, in wild ways. And have compassion for yourself and use those moments to go within and heal, because it's coming up, because it's coming up. So don't blame your kid for bringing it up in you. It's coming up in
mhm.
you because it was lying dormant, and your kid inflamed that wound, and now it's come alive. So don't blame your kid for it coming up. It's coming up because it's coming up. Thank your kid for showing you that you still have to evolve and heal, and then use that moment to go within to actually do the work to evolve and heal.
Beautiful. We're almost wrapping it up because I can't believe we're at 45 minutes or so already. Just to review the last piece around consequences, I really like what you said about letting there be natural consequences, and versus sort of me being the consequence handler who's just always dishing out the consequences to my child, and
Mhm.
allowing life to teach her.
Mhm.
and allowing, the other influences, the other parents, the teachers, the other structures that she's a part of to have their consequences. Um, but the question I have is, you know, you seem like you've got a badass in you. You've definitely got like a badass energy. And with your daughter, when it comes to following through on your word and what you've said, I'm going to shut this party down if this line is crossed. Um, what do you have to say around have bringing this kind of like badass energy where you won't be pushed over, or you're going to keep your word, you do what you say, you follow through. How do you bring that energy without it being sort of like a punishing or dominating?
Oh, I'm so excited you called me badass in that way. I'm actually the biggest pushover when it comes to actually implementing boundaries. That's my
Mm.
weakness. I'm a fixer parent. And my daughter, at the age of like 4 or 5, figured it out. She told her friend one day, "Don't worry, my mom is saying no now, but I'll just keep working. I'll keep working on her." I'm so excited you think I'm badass. And I am badass in many ways, but man, I have such a hard time with boundaries. So
Mm.
I'm a work in progress, I just have to say. But I'll tell you where I was consistent. I was consistent in my connection with my daughter. So I really, really became her ally. And through that connection, I had very strong influence. And through that influence, I had power, right? So I didn't go at it top down, I went at it side by side. And but let's talk about consequences. So, as much as possible, we want to tell the kid, like, hey, come on. So, for example, if your 5-year-old is hitting you, right? You don't have to hit them back and you don't have to yell at them, but you do this. And I used to do these things to my daughter. I used to go, oh my God, ouch, 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 ouch. I used to, extra verbalize the pain. And then because children are so loving by nature, she would feel so empathic and come like, and I used to make her be the nurse. We used to put a band-aid. We used to put a big thing, big production through empathy, through
Right.
connection. But it's true, right? That's the concept. You hit someone, you're going to hurt them. But the consequence is not to make the kid feel bad for hurting them necessarily through shame, but feel bad for hurting them because the other is in pain. So instead of taking away the focus from the other person, so if they hit us, we hit them, and now we've created shame in them. How silly. Instead, we
Mhm.
need to make them have empathy for the pain they created in the object of the pain, right? And
Mhm.
then children will not want to do that. They will not, really, they will not. So if they're rude to you, instead of being rude back, I will go into my heart and I'll say, Maya, that really hurt my feelings. Man, you really stabbed my self-esteem. You really killed me. Like if she was 13 or 14, I'd be like, Maya, you're killing me, man. You're hurting me.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
then she'd be like, geez, I didn't mean to hurt you. I'm like, yeah, well, you're hurting me. Right. So that's authentic connection. It's showing up as a real person, but from the heart, never intending to shame the other person. Or if she's then, if your kid is not doing their homework, then you go, man, Maya, whatever, Becky, Sam, Arthur, whatever, you're going, your teacher's not going to be happy. Like, I get you don't want to do homework, but now you're going to have to answer to your teacher. And then the kid is like, say the kid is like, I don't care, I'll answer to my teacher. You're like, okay, I feel for your teacher and I feel for you. And then the
Mhm.
next day, the teacher gets upset with them and then they come home crying. Then you're like, I told you the teacher felt upset because she cares about you. She gives you homework. You're creating a model of interpersonal relatability and relationship. So you're not saying do the homework because I need you to do the homework. No. You're not saying do the homework, otherwise I'm going to yell and punish at you. No. You're doing the homework because it's respectful to the teacher who took the time to give you the homework, right?
Mhm.
Don't do it for
Mhm.
me. Don't do it for the grade. Do it because you have a relationship with this teacher and you're showing her that you're learning, right? So
Mhm.
that's where you try to always find the naturalness of the environment instead of creating this unnatural punishment. You do cause and effect as much as possible.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, we all want to attach at every age. My daughter already has got attachment down, and she's 4 months old, and
Yes.
still, as an adult, I attach with my
Yes.
wife, with my child, with my friends. And
Yes.
so, we're talking about using attachment to our advantage in a way that we're not manipulating it. We're just, we're keeping attachment present for the change process to occur. Whereas when I was a child, it was kind of, the attachment was threatened. If I didn't do what I was told, then attachment would be taken away. And then I end up in this cold, dark place. And I just want to draw another line to back up what you're saying here, because in the counseling world, I'm a trained counselor, and statisticians have looked at what is the likelihood that a client is going to have a positive outcome with a therapist or a counselor. Like, what are the factors, and how do we increase that success? Well, it turns out that the number one influencer in client success is the relationship between the client and the counselor, or the client and the therapist. If the client believes in the counselor, believes in the therapist, and feels safe with them and like they like them, they're much more likely to have positive outcomes, even if the therapist has an amazing tool that is just a mind-blowing perspective. If the client doesn't have a good relationship with the therapist, they don't change. They don't take the tool, they don't change their lives.
Right. Look at our relationship with all the people in our lives who we have felt the best with, the most secure with. They may not have even taken us to one basketball game, to one trip, to bought us one expensive thing. But when we're in their presence, we feel golden. We feel like
Mhm,
they see us, they accept us. I always tell parents, please only put money in that emotional bank. Stop wasting your money on taking them to Timbuktu and buying them expensive things or buying them gadgets. That does not a relationship make. Focus on your presence. Show up. Be there. Make sure you're attuning to who it is they are. Make your kid feel like they matter. That's your role as a parent. Let everybody else do the rest. You do
mhm,
that, and then your kid is going to be golden, because
mhm,
that's the essential ingredient of well-being, is that deep connection, attachment, closeness, bond, feeling accepted and worthy, like I matter. That's it.
mhm,
That's it. And that can
mhm,
be communicated non-verbally. You don't even have to use words. You just have to show your presence, that the kid matters.
mhm. Before we wrap up, I just want to add one last comment. This piece around sharing with your daughter, oh, that hurts. That is, I know so many people that sharing that with their romantic partner, like being able to say to their romantic partner, like, hey, you know what? What you said actually hurt my feelings. That is a huge step for so many people to be able to say that. And for those listening, if you haven't ridden that edge, if you haven't come to that place where you're trying to practice that right now in your relationships, and you're about to have a child, or you do have a child, it's coming. Another opportunity for you to speak authentically about how things feel, right? And um, I'm still working on that, because I put the armor on, I shut down, I put the defenses up, and I get into avoidance mode, with my partner when I feel hurt. And so I don't want to do that with my kid.
Right.
And so I'm like nervously anticipating those opportunities, but leaning in, because I know that's what she needs. And I know that's what I need.
Yeah.
So thank you for that.
Yeah, it's so beautiful to
Yeah.
hear you talk like that. It's the most beautiful thing we'll ever do in life, is one of the most beautiful things. I don't want to make people who've decided not to be parents to feel bad, because that is equally noble and beautiful. But this relationship, it's just something else. It'll take you to the edges of insanity, but also the edges of your giving, and expose you to your absolute selfishness, but also your capacity to be very generous and selfless. So it's this paradoxical relationship of who it is you are that comes out like in no other relationship. So welcome to your paradox. You're going to see all your paradoxes coming out, and that's the
Yeah.
beauty of it. That's the growing edge of this relationship. So congratulations, and thank you for sharing my book. It's the Parenting Map. Please grab a copy and support conscious parenting out into the world. It's a new paradigm. I believe it's the paradigm that will save the planet, really.
And thank you, Dr. Shefali, for coming on the show, for sharing your wisdom, for writing this book, and for taking your journey with your daughter, which could have just been a very private thing that you kept to yourself, but documenting your learning, your growth, and sharing it with other people. You've inspired so many parents. Yeah, I'm just very grateful for you and for the work you've done. So thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, it means so much to me. Thank you so much.
All right, we're going to leave all of your links in my show notes. The new book is The Parenting Map. And I someday, again, would love to have you on the show. Thanks again. Thanks for watching another episode of the Evolving Man podcast. Please like, subscribe, leave a comment below about what you got out of this episode. I really appreciate the engagement. And please share it with a friend. If this conversation was inspiring for you in some way, send it to somebody who might like it. All right, my relationship program is the Conscious Relationship Council. It's for men, and you can check it out. I'll leave a link down below. If you're dealing with an addiction and you want to conquer it, the Freedom from Addiction Circle is something that I run. It's a private coaching group with me and a small group of men. You can reach out on a social media channel of your choice or through my website to find out more about that. All the best to you.